Good morning. Welcome to our Racial Equity Rapid Roundtable. This is a discussion of racial inequities experienced by Texas children and their families. We invite experts to discuss pervasive issues and trends impacting historically marginalized communities, such as African American, Hispanic communities. This month's Racial Equity Roundtable will focus on school discipline disparities and how they negatively affect children of color, particularly Black children and also children of immigrants. Experts will discuss how implicit bias impacts Black children when it comes to school discipline in the classroom and what can be done to overcome these biases to ensure an equitable learning experience for Black students. We're appreciative that this Racial Equity Rapid Roundtable today is sponsored by Amazon. I'm happy to have with me Dr. Dawn DuBose, who's Chief of Schools at Stafford Municipal School District, Andre Watkins, Principal Consultant of 7 Piece Solutions, Dr. Kalila Campbell-Roan, who is Houston ISD Transformation Area Superintendent. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Ana Alaman, who's the Children at Risk Texas Border Regional Director. I want to share some key facts to help us with our discussion today. In 2017, 2018, Texas districts were still 2.5 times more likely to suspend Black students in early elementary grades compared to white students. A study of Texas discipline policies by the Council of State Governments Justice Center and Texas A&M University's Public Policy Research Institute in 2011 found that for students in middle or high school, 23% of those suspended at least once ended up in contact with a juvenile probation officer, compared with just 2% of those not disciplined. And some national studies that analyze the relationships between race, ethnicity, generational status, misbehavior, and school discipline also find that Latino children of immigrants have increased odds of being disciplined despite having similar levels of misbehavior as white American peers. And so understanding and meeting the needs of students without bias are the most important task of educators and school administrators. So viewed through that lens, discipline should guide students towards success and not steer them toward failure. So I'm happy to get into that discussion with you today. And I want to start with Dr. DuBose and ask what you might attribute to the school discipline disparities experienced by students of color and children of immigrants. And tell me a bit about what you're doing at Stafford as well.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. You've actually touched on a little bit of it already by talking about implicit bias. There are many teachers, a lot of our field is kind of new right now. Let me just say that. And the reason I'm saying it's new is that we have a lot of people that are new to the field, but we also have a lot of people that are still in the field. So we also know that there is a continued need to have conversations around cultural competence, whether you go to a traditional educational program or if you go through an alternative program. So those are some pieces of it. There's some other pieces when we talk about kind of our novice teachers, our new teachers that are in the field. A lot of times there is a lack of classroom management. And so a lot of times that can lead to a disparity. And then there's another side of it, because a lot of times when we're talking, we put a lot of it on the educator, but then there are some pieces that relate to academic identity. We do have some kids that do not want to have an academic identity, and those are some things that we have to work on. And then lastly, I would say that we certainly have to continue to find ways to build relevance in our schools and to build relationships to help basically alleviate some of the disparities that are taking as it relates to discipline.
Are there some things that you're doing at Stafford that help to close these gaps?
We're definitely making sure that we are working with our various stakeholders and nonprofit organizations to make sure that we are providing ongoing professional development to our teachers on an ongoing basis. And also, again, just also making sure we have those resources with outside entities that can also help us and help students reach those goals that they need so that they can actually learn in the classroom.
Thanks. Mr. Watkins, how do you feel that basic needs of the whole child affect student behavior? And what's the school's responsibility to address those needs?
Thank you for that question, Mrs. Jones. The basic needs of the child are very important, seeing as how the children are the raw material that we process through our schools in order to come out with the product, which is a more well-rounded and well-educated person that is able to go out into society and be productive. So unless we address those base needs, unless we just go back to bare bones Maslow's and start at the bottom of the pyramid, then the higher thinking elements of education are not going to be met. It's almost going to be like blowing into a box fan and hoping that you win that competition, so that we have to really get back to meeting the base needs of the child. We know they're going to be fed. We know they're going to be clothed. We know they're going to have a roof over their heads. But what about those base needs of security in school systems where they may be coming off of multi-generations of being hurt by the school system as it was previously, and as some of the remnants still remain? So that when we begin dealing with that child, we need to make sure that we're taking those cultural harms into our purview as well.
Are you seeing greater disparities and greater discipline problems relating to basic needs as a result of this pandemic?
Yes, I am. I'm also seeing the fact that we are forgetting that teachers and staff were traumatized also during this 18 months of global trauma. And we really didn't start the school system off even seeing to our own needs this year. We just kind of opened the doors and said, okay, let's go back to normal. So I'm running into my work a lot of staff harm and a lot of staff concerns that have to be addressed also through the means of relationship building and just holistically getting back to being people in the same building. We're expecting staff just to come back and be like they were 18 months ago. And unfortunately, that's not possible.
Thanks. Dr. Rohn, what is the school's responsibility in addressing the needs of children, and especially as it relates to these disparities?
So whether we want to consume it or not, we now have a huge responsibility in making sure that the social emotional learning aspect of the student is met before we can even begin the educational part. And as I said before, we may not want to be the nurse, the counselor, the doctor, the emotional leader of the campus, but that's exactly what principals are right now. And so it is our responsibility as a district to ensure that some of the things that these students in pre-COVID, and now certainly exacerbated by COVID, some of the things that our students have been exposed to are very detrimental to their psyche. So before they can even begin to learn 7 times 7, we have to clear the space for them to be successful in the educational arena. And so by that, I mean, we have to provide the social emotional aspect of how do we walk into a building now? You've been away from campus for a few months. What does it look like to be back? And what behaviors do we have to curb that you have learned over these past 12 to 18 months that you've been away from school? Do we have to relearn? And even at the high school level and at the middle school level, you would assume, you've been in school for 7 years now. This should be rote memory to you, but there are a lot of behaviors that we have to address. And so it has now become the responsibility, like it or not, for schools and for school districts to have a plan for students to re-engage into what education looks like, re-engage into what proper behavior, how do we get along with our friends? Social media plays a huge role in what our kids are dealing with right now. So we also have to learn how to mitigate social media on campuses, as well as the outcomes of what's happened with COVID, plus what was already going on in the lives of students pre-COVID. So our responsibility is monumental, but I think if we chip away at it, we can get to a place where students are successful again. But that goes first with relationships and rapport, because we can have all the programs in the world accessible to us, but if they are not implemented with someone who you actually believe cares and loves about you, then it's not going to be successful.
That's a great segue to another thing I want to talk about, and it's when children can see themselves in teachers and administrators. What role does that play in helping discipline issues? And Dr. DuBose, please step in to help answer this question. Is what is the effect on children in seeing Black faces, Black and brown teachers and administrators in the school setting?
It makes a world of difference. I know here recently in Houston, there was some controversy about, we'll say, the efficacy of African-American teachers. And what we know is that it has made a significant difference in the amount of students who have gone on to higher education due to interacting with an African-American teacher. So we know that it makes a difference, where students need to have some type of interaction in elementary, as early as elementary, because they do need to start self-actualizing. It's interesting that Mr. Watkins mentioned Maslow, and we talk about the basic needs, but when you start getting into that hierarchy, the esteem is almost on the highest level. So we know that kids need to have the esteem, they have to have the self-love, they have to have the respect of others. So it doesn't even become even just about the basic needs. And we keep saying this word, relationships, it's critical. So non-African-American teachers can still play that role. I mean, I've had teachers in my career, in my academic career, that were non-African-American that played a big role, but the research specifically states that African-American children definitely benefit by having an African-American educator in multiple throughout their school career.
That's excellent information. Mr. Watkins, I know you coach teachers and coach administrators on how to discipline in ways that don't remove children from their educational environment. Can you tell us some of those best practices?
Well, we form subgroups of children using what they call SubPops, in education. We identify people that have different struggles, and we group them in support groups, utilizing teachers and administrators who can identify with those struggles that they have to help them outside of the classroom environment. We have early morning tutoring sessions, we have lunchtime tutoring sessions, as well as after school. Now, those tutoring sessions are not always just on core material. Sometimes those sessions are on how to deal with a difficult person or a difficult situation, how to code switch, how do we talk on Instagram versus how we talk in a professional email or in an email to a teacher, phone etiquette, different things that have been forgotten because we've gotten so technologically advanced, and children are introduced to technology so early that we learn tech speak, before we learn how to speak the official business language or the language of the land. So we've just developed small group settings in which to deal with these real world problems, because shooting out a broad curriculum and just kind of shotgunning it, for lack of a better term, at your whole building, it doesn't work because it's diluted. But when we address it in small groups and small settings with supportive adults, it tends to work out 10 times better. And the adults are helped along the way because it helps their efficacy in dealing with children they may have issues.
Thanks. Dr. Roan, we've talked a lot about what administrators and teachers can understand and relate to. Let's talk directly to parents. And what do parents need to know about school discipline policies and about these disparities that children face? And how can they be effective advocates for their children in light of these statistics?
I think the biggest piece of being an effective advocate as a parent is realizing that your kids need you more in middle school and high school than they actually did at elementary. And that's when we tend to say, oh, this is middle school, I can back away. No, we need you more in their business in middle school and high school than you ever were in elementary. And elementary teachers are more coddling, they're more parental-like. And so the absence of a parent is probably easier at that point than it is once they become teenagers and teenagers, that's when we really need to be able to know what our kids are doing in their room when the doors are closed, what they're doing after school, what they're doing during school when they're supposed to be at school, but they may not be. We really need to start keeping better tabs on what our kids' lives look like between those ages. The second piece is know board policy for your students' campus. Get involved. Don't believe everything that's told to you without seeing it in writing. Many times, and I am an educator, someone will tell me something not knowing what role I have in education, and it's not true, right? And so when I go investigate on my own, I can come back with written documentation that says, well, I pulled your board policy last night, and no, actually you can't give my child a 0 for this assignment. Whatever the case may be just as invested in your kids' lives as they grow older as you were in elementary, when you used to read every single paper that came home and sign it and make sure it was back in their backpack on its way back to school. Be so invested like that at the earlier ages, because we all know that if something happens to one of our African-American, our Hispanic American students at that age, that is a key indicator that that child will be retained in the 9th grade, which will become a dropout, which is a direct school to prison pipeline. So we have to remain invested in what is best for my kid at all times. Let me read this student code of conduct as soon as I get it. I know it's thick, I know it's laborious, but it's so important. And talk to your kids. Sometimes they just don't know. We assume, oh, he's in middle school, now he knows, or she's in middle school, now she knows. They don't. And so you have to be very specific with them on what you can and cannot do. And it goes back to that, what Mr. Watson was speaking of, that language that you use in social media, that can be detrimental for you as a kid. Some kids don't know that. You know, we have sexting, we have texting, we have improper terminology, we have bullying through social media. We have to be sure that we know those things and know the ramifications of them and communicate that with our kids. And once our kids know that we know, they're less likely to do a lot of those things. And we have to be their advocate by being aware of what the outcomes are, what the subsequent consequences are of certain actions that they may take.
Thank you. Dr. DuBose, do you have a follow-up?
I was going to add that the student code of conduct, really understanding that, because as Dr. Rowe mentioned, there are some pieces that trigger automatic removals when you get into cyberbullying, taking pictures of people. And in addition to that, not only does it carry consequences from the school, it can also carry consequences in the criminal justice system as well, especially if it's a situation where someone can press charges against, you know, a student. So it is critical that there are discussions about that. I don't know if we do it as well as we used to, I'm going to be honest, because there's so many things that we're trying to do. And you see a lot of kids, some kids that you would never think that would have to be removed to different settings because they didn't know. They did not really understand the weight of what they were doing. So it is really serious to understand the things that can trigger those automatic, let me say this, required removals, and in some instances even required expulsions.
Good information. To just kind of summarize the things that we've talked about, it's important for parents to understand and to know what the rules are, to talk to their children. It's important for educators and administrators to look at the whole child and to make sure that we're meeting their needs, that translates directly into better behavior. And just to close out, I want to give each of you an opportunity again to share anything you want to share for parents and for listeners to keep in mind. And Mr. Watkins, I'll give you that last opportunity.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. For parents and students as well as educators, the self-care of ourselves based on the last 18 months plus that we've been through is vitally essential to getting a proper education for our children. Our children are not our future, our children are our now. Every minute, every day with them is so important for their development. There is no state and time where the switch will magically flip. The product depends on everything that we sow into them every minute of every day, and we cannot pour out of buckets that are empty. So as the adults in our children's life, make sure that you're getting your bucket filled on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. I want to thank each of you for your participation, and I want to encourage those who are interested in hearing more about this topic and more about how we can support children from cradle to career to visit childrenatrisk.org and to sign up for our free summit that will take place this Thursday, the 24th at 9:30 a.m. It is our State of Black Children in Texas Summit, how to support our children from cradle to career. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing more from you, hearing more about what you're doing, and more about how you're contributing to the success of all children in Texas.
Thank you.
Thank you.